What's your I met a celebrity but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? My mom is a big sports fan. One time she was shopping and saw a really large, fit-looking man who she didn't immediately recognize but seemed familiar. She thought it must have been a professional football player or something, so she went up to the only other person in the shop, who was this smaller weird-looking guy, and asked him if he knew who the athletic-looking man was. The short guy looked at my mom and said, "That's my bodyguard. I'm Elton John." I was in a bookstore in RI and was in the horror section. Picked up a book by Stephen King and flipped it over and saw his picture on the back, or inside the cover. I don't really remember. I look up, and in the next aisle over, right across the bookshelf from me, is a guy that looks exactly like Stephen King. So I hold up the book and say, "Is this you?" "Yeah." "Good books. Thanks." And that was that. My husband was vacationing in California, killing time in a bar over a burger and a beer. A guy sits next to him and my husband has a nice chat with him. The guy leaves and my husband goes to close his tab and the bartender tells him it's been covered by the guy he was talking to. The bartender asks if he knows who he was talking to. My husband has no idea. Chuck Norris, it was his bar. I worked at a Barnes & Noble in New York as a clerk, but once or twice I'd be called over to the in-store Starbucks cafe to help out whenever they were understaffed. One time, Alan Rickman came up and ordered something. I can't recall what. I wrote hand scrubber on his cup though. He smiled at me when he noticed it. Was walking out of a gas station over on Crescent Heights and Sunset, and heard a hey, hey, coming from a cracked window on tinted out Range Rover that was parked at one of the pumps. I walk over to the car to see Jeff Goldblum, who had somehow seen my gold ring I was wearing on my right hand from 20 feet away. He proceeds to tell me how he loves my ring and has been looking for one just like it and asks me where I got it. I tell him it was my grandfather's and he asks to see it up close. I hold my hand up to Jeff Goldblum. He takes my hand, gushes about the ring for a minute and thanks me. I said sure and walked back to my apartment. I like to think we're friends now. I was 10 years old in 2002 when my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo for the first time. It was a rainy day so we practically had the whole place to ourselves except for 3 British kids running around, chaperoned by a woman. My mom quickly befriended the woman while I made like a kid and joined the horde, looking at spiders and scorpions and sharing in the awe and excitement of the animals. After about an hour when we said our goodbyes, my mother told me that the kid, Daniel, who I had been hanging out with, had played Harry Potter in the movie that came out last year. I had thought he looked familiar. I worked at a movie theater in Albuquerque at the time they were filming the first Avengers film. Captain America was about to come out. I remember because we had the huge standee of him in the lobby. I was reading in the box office when 3 people came up. Guy asked for 3 tickets to Bridesmaids. It was dark out and he had a green baseball cap and sunglasses. He paid with a credit card. Christopher Evans. I stared at the card after I swiped it. Handed it back. "I need you to sign the receipt." He did. And then he walked in. My dad and I bumped into Michael Jordan at a Walgreens near Chicago. This was back in 2006 or so. We were picking out birthday cards for my mom and MJ and his son came in the same aisle browsing some cards. My dad kept his cool and continued to look through different cards, giving him his personal space. I, on the other hand, was 9 years old and in awe, sort of staring at him. After MJ picked out his card, he winked at me and gave me a walk-by fist bump. Didn't really set in until I was older how cool that was. I helped Steven Spielberg move his daughter's bags into her college dorm. I was working a shift helping first years move in and I see a guy in a hat and sunglasses who is unmistakably Spielberg. I strike up a conversation, ask if he needs help with the bags, etc. First names only, we're from CA. My wife, Kate, and I sent all our kids to East Coast schools though. Stuff like that. Later, when his daughter opened the door for the first time, he whipped out a camcorder and, wearing the biggest dad grin, recorded the whole thing before turning the camera on my friend and me to ask us about the city. So, I have a supporting, the luggage, speaking role in a limited release, home movie, film shot by Steven Spielberg. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant right outside LA in the late 90s. One day Leonardo DiCaprio came in with who I assume was his mom to have lunch. This would have been post-Titanic, so really at the peak of his breakthrough mega celeb status. He was wearing a ball cap, sunglasses and unshaven, but I recognized him anyway. I didn't let anyone know and I wrote something like, "Your movies are awesome. I hope you liked our food" on his receipt when I dropped it off at the table. After he left, I swung by and picked up his payment and he had left me a note back that said, "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover," with a $100 tip. It was awesome. I was only like 19. I went and got some PlayStation games with it after my shift ended. Robin Williams used to walk around my lone childhood country town near SF. I saw him once, after hearing many rumors about his sightings, not entirely unlike Bigfoot or Nessie sightings. My brain didn't fully comprehend what it was seeing, but I could tell he was trying his very best to remain incognito and not draw any unwanted attention. We locked eyes. He smiled, I smiled and nodded back, and we both went our separate ways. I met Justin Timberlake and had no idea it was him, until someone told me afterwards. Went to a basketball game with my dad and we stopped by the bar area in the arena first. The game had just started so it was pretty empty except for the bar itself. My dad goes to the restroom and I walk up to the bar to order a beer. There's only one seat at the bar next to a guy in a baseball cap and sunglasses. I politely ask if the seat is taken and he just says, "Nope, it's all you, man." We shoot the crap for a couple minutes. He's sitting on my right and eventually he says he and his wife are going to go to their seats. He extends his hand and asks my name. I tell him and ask his name. He says, "Justin. Nice to meet you, dude. Have a good night." He and his wife leave and the bartender comes up to me and says, "You know that was Justin Timberlake, right?" I immediately did a double take and couldn't believe I didn't recognize him even with the hat and sunglasses. I told my girlfriend at the time, who was a huge Justin Timberlake fan, and she couldn't believe I met him without knowing it was him. She wouldn't let it go for like a month. In the mid-90s, I was a cab driver. Our service was like a cross between a limo and a taxi, and we serviced some fancy resorts. As I dropped off my passenger at a resort, another guy asks if I'm a taxi, and I say yes, so he tells his friend their cab is here. His friend got in the car and said, "This ain't no cab. Smells too good to be a cab," in that unmistakable Chris Rock voice. He and his friend just talked with each other for the 15-minute drive to a local nightclub. There was a white kid trying to talk to a yellow cab driver ahead of us in the parking lot and Chris Rock started imitating the kid, like, "I need a ride, yeah, I'm drunk, but I need a ride," and I was trying really hard not to laugh out loud. He wasn't nearly as famous yet at the time, but I had seen his stand-up routines on Comedy Central and knew exactly who he was, but didn't go fanboy on him. 10 out of 10 would drive Chris Rock again. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him, but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan, so walked up to him and said, "Excuse me, do you work here?" He replied, "I mean, yeah, kind of." I say, "What can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "Nah, I'm just messing with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. My friend's mom, over 70 years old, owns a small Asian grocery store. Post Malone came walking in with his girlfriend, and his mom had no idea who he was. A few cute things happened. She was nervous because of his tattoos, but happy, not worried once he bought a lot of food. She had no idea he was a celebrity. She gave him a free snack for buying so much food, and told him to come back for lunchtime for cheap and tasty gyoza. He did come back the next day. She was worried he would get mugged going to his car, because of 3 big men outside, so she followed him outside. They were his bodyguards. She really liked his cool car. It was a Lamborghini. She told my friend about the encounter that evening and he pulled up a YouTube video based on the description. It was him. When Post Malone came back the next day for gyoza, she got a selfie with him. It's on my friend's phone, so I don't have the picture available right now. Whole thing is adorable with how innocent his mom is. I was sitting at the Genius bar at an Apple store one day and a very large man with dreads came and sat next to me. He was bringing his phone in to get fixed because he dropped it and didn't have a case. I overheard an employee jokingly say, "You wear a helmet when you play football. Shouldn't your phone have the same protection?" I knew it was Larry Fitzgerald, but I didn't want to be a fanboy, so I started asking very broad questions about what he did as a profession to stay engaged in a conversation with him. Larry Fitz is, to this day, one of the nicest, most humble people I have ever met. One of my best friend's doppelganger is Ethan Hawke. Like, it's scary how much he resembles him, to the point that during those stupid Facebook challenges he just changed his profile picture to him and nobody realized it. Also, his favorite story was one time at San Diego Comic-Con, he actually confused Rosario Dawson at a hotel bar. Anyway, one night I'm walking home from work in New York City, and I see who I thought was my friend, John, just walking on a kind of secluded part of a 9th Ave around Hell's Kitchen, and I yell, "John." He doesn't turn around. So I decide to yell it again, and instead of responding his pace quickens. I decide the best thing to do is to run at him, which seemed to terrify him, as keep in mind it's late and there are very few people around. Anyway, I catch up to him and say, "Oh, you're not John," and then walk away from what was a very frightened Ethan Hawke.